Hello, I'm Deigo, a future game developer, and today I bring you a new series for the channel, the Macro Versus, where I will be showing 9 fights from 2 different franchises. In this case, 5 Nights at Freddy's vs Poppy Playtime, pitting the most powerful characters who share similar traits and deciding which universe is stronger. Each fight will have its own video, where we'll analyze things like strength, speed, endurance, and more, seeing who wins each round. Then we'll narrate an imaginary battle based on their strengths and weaknesses. The first fight, Freddy Fazbear vs Huggy Wuggy, the faces of their games. 2 children murdered by evil geniuses, trapped in the mascots of 2 unscrupulous companies, becoming killing machines without empathy. Freddy is an animatronic bear possessed by the ghost of a child murdered by William Afton, spending decades trapped in a piece of metal smelling of death, slowly losing his identity. Huggy Wuggy was originally an orphan used as an experiment subject by Playtime Co. The experiment gave him enormous size and brutal strength, but it also destroyed his sanity, turning him into an extremely violent creature. 2 children who fell into misfortune, who were stripped of their humanity and innocence, and now we're going to see which of these 2 would win a fight, moving on to the first section. Let's start with strength and see how strong Freddy is. We'll consider feats from movies and books, because if we only use the games as a basis, let's say the fight would be very unfair for the bear, since we literally couldn't say anything about him, or at least in this section. Let's start with the basics. It's a metal animatronic, stronger than any human. According to unofficial data calculated by fans, it's about 1.8 meters tall and weighs 160 kilos, and possibly its strength was increased by agony. If you don't know what agony is, it's the strongest feeling in the 5 Nights at Freddy's universe. So much so that this feeling can even create life or empower souls, giving them paranormal abilities. But Freddy is not the case. At most, it only boosts the animatronic's strength and resistance. Let's move on to the feats of strength. First, let's look at the hit he delivered in the second graphic novel of Charlie's trilogy, striking another animatronic with the full force of both his arms, completely obliterating it in one single blow. I must point out though that these animatronics didn't seem to be of the best quality, and just a few panels earlier they'd been set on fire, weakening them. But that doesn't change the fact he could easily destroy metal. Imagine if it wasn't a robot but a human. In the first film, he split a person in half using the strength of his jaw. To do this, he'd need the force of 1020 kilograms, or about 2250 pounds, and since it didn't cost him effort, let's say his bite is well over a ton. But his best feat is in the second movie, where he splits Toy Freddy in half, and although I don't think the toys are made of more resistant materials, I'd put this at a minimum of 2 to 3 tons, even though it didn't take him much effort to do this, so his maximum strength could be a bit higher. But I think we can calculate their strength limit using the door as a reference, considering they can't enter the office because they can't destroy this metal plate. So if we calculate the force needed to knock down the door, we'll know the force they can't overcome. Although it's complicated to make calculations since, well, in the game they don't say anything about this door, not even its material. But in the interactive book, it's made clear to us that it's a reinforced super door. It's not much information, but I think we can use it as a base. So let's say it's equivalent to a reinforced steel industrial security door, which in real life weighs between 200 to 500 kilograms or 440 to 1100 pounds. And according to some ChatGPT calculations, it would require the force of between 4 to 8 tons. So Freddy's strength is above 3 tons but below 8. Now that we've covered Freddy's strength, let's move on to Huggy's. Starting with the obvious, he stands taller than 2 doors, so his height is 4.20 meters, or 14 feet tall, which is quite a bit taller than Freddy. These are also unofficial heights, so please don't take them as absolute truth. He could perfectly be a little more or a little less. I estimate his weight to be between 700 kilograms and 1,740 pounds. I repeat, nothing official. The first feat of strength we saw him perform was lifting a mechanical metal door. We're already off to a bad start. In chapter 1, if we pay close attention, we can clearly see Huggy watching us, lifting a metal door, much like the one in 5 Nights at Freddy's one. However, this doesn't necessarily mean he's stronger, it just shows he has more mobility than Freddy. If the bear could move more agilely and not so robotically, he would also possess the strength to lift that door. It takes 8 tons to destroy the door, not merely to lift it. So we still don't know if he possesses the sufficient strength to break the metal door from 5 Nights at Freddy's one, and therefore his superior strength would be quite debatable. Let's move on to his second feat of strength, which would be destroying a metal door. At the beginning of chapter 5, he would bend the security door with pure brute force. It took him a few hits, but he could destroy the door from 5 nights at Freddy's 1. Although his feat bothers me a little, and it's not because it seems too much to me, but because it seems too little if we compare it to his best feat of strength, which is destroying a concrete wall with metal beams and without much effort. Doing this would be equivalent to at least 30 tons of force, at least since he seemed to do it with little effort. And it's strange because he struggles to break a metal door that only needs a maximum of 8 tons. Perhaps we can justify it by saying he inhaled the purple cat's gases, which then weakened him. Let's just say, that's what it was. But anyway, Huggy's strength is well over 30 tons, delivering an absolute batting to Freddy in this first round. Honestly, Freddy in this regard left much to be desired, as we have no single feat showing his resistance. In fact, the only thing we have about Freddy's resistance is bad, as in the Silver Eyes, he was knocked down by a normal guy. Although the blow didn't affect him, I repeat, he couldn't withstand the impact of a normal person. Also in the game, he was destroyed by William Afton, causing his soul to abandon his metallic body. But we don't have the context for all of this. Perhaps the Purple Man used electricity to slowly dismantle his body, considering all animatronics are quite vulnerable to it. But for now, all his displays of resistance have been negative, so let's just say his resistance is superhuman, since he's made of metal, but his balance is at the same level as a turtle flipped on its back. Now let's go to Huggy's feat of endurance. The one everyone talks about when his general strength is brought up, his famous fall from chapter 1, the second most impressive feat of endurance by any character in Poppy Playtime, which is quite impressive, but people tend to greatly exaggerate this because Huggy doesn't actually fall all the way down as many claim. Instead, his fall would only be about 20 meters or 66 feet in height, as perhaps they weren't aware that almost at the very end of chapter 2 in Bunzo's factory, we can observe some blue hairs and a few bloodstains. So, he fell all the way down here, and it's most probable that he was unconscious, and the prototype took him to heal him. That explains who treated Huggy's injuries and how the prototype ended up with his arm. He didn't fall freely into the depths, but the prototype dropped him to hunt the player, because if he had fallen to the lowest point, all that would be left of him would be a puddle of blood and blue fur. And it's not something I believe, but pure logic. We take into account that a fall of a few meters made him bleed. Nothing would have been left of him if he had fallen more than the 100 meters or 330 feet high that the factory measures. As I said, we can see this in chapter 2, meaning we barely went down at all until that point in the story. Based on what I saw, considering some fan calculations and what I observed, Huggy didn't fall more than 20 meters or 66 feet, and if we take into account his unofficial height and weight, and that he fell onto a metal pipe according to an AI's calculations, the force of the fall would be about 686,000 newtons, equivalent to a 70-ton impact. Although in chapter 5 we can see that this blow left him very badly wounded. Perhaps if it weren't for experiment 1006 he would have already died, but it doesn't mean he can't survive a point-blank shotgun blast without problems. Although the prototype could seriously damage him, I think this says more about the colossal strength of the Jester than the resistance of the blue plush toy. So, its resistance to impact is 70 tons, but it would be very badly injured, and Freddy can't withstand a normal human's attack, so Huggy wins again by a landslide. Let's move on to the next section, maybe Freddy can win.
Who's hungry?
Freddy's speed is very difficult to calculate since we didn't really see any of his actual feats. The games are just static images without animations, and the real-life animatronics are too slow for them to move fluidly in the films. In special delivery he can run, but this isn't the true Freddy, but rather a mere copy of him, so it doesn't count. However, thanks to the graphic novel, we do know his punches can be quite fast, or at least the image conveys that sense of speed. Yes, I'm literally calculating the speed of a character from a poorly drawn image. It also appears that in the darkness he gets a speed bonus as he feels more at ease there, and within the game's mechanics he is the one who moves fastest from one camera to another. So among the original animatronics, not counting Foxy, he is the quickest. So, I suppose that's something. I'll rate Freddy's speed as disabled old man, since we have nothing to go on to calculate it. Huggy Wuggy's speed is quite disappointing, considering that 90% of this character's appearances involves him running right after the player. And that's precisely the problem, because for very obvious reasons, he never actually catches us. In the first chapter, it's understandable since it chases us in a very tight place where its large size doesn't help it. But in chapter 5, it's behind us with little distance between us, and still it can't catch us. At first, I thought it was the red gas, but his injuries kept him from moving properly. But no, he always had this speed, since the official Poppy Playtime book tells us that when he escaped the factory in 3 minutes, he almost reached half a mile, which is about 16 kilometers per hour. This is the speed of a normal person, in good physical shape, but not at a professional athlete's level. So there are humans faster than Huggy, such as the player. And these aren't my calculations, they're official data. But even though Huggy's speed is human, he is still much faster than Freddy, so he wins again. So let's move to the last section and cross our fingers that Freddy can win something. In this section, we'll cover the full combat capabilities of these two opponents, including their fighting style and combat intellect, although truthfully, neither of them possesses much of either. In fact, I can't really say anything about Freddy's fighting style. His 2 feats of strength in the movies were against people who were distracted, and we only know that his intellect is that of a child. While Huggy, though he's also just a little kid, is extremely violent like a wild animal. However, he can follow Prototype's orders, and we've seen Kissy manage to calm him, so he still retains some humanity. While I believe Freddy's intellect is slightly superior, his combat ability is an entirely different matter. As I've mentioned, Huggy is truly a beast. He uses the full force of his entire body to strike, and his way of running and attacking is very much like a bear's. He was capable of murdering multiple Playtime agents, even those armed with tranquilizers. So, I also have to give this point to Huggy since his fighting style proved to be much more effective. So now that we've covered all the sections, let's see who the winner is.
Could it be either of the two?
I first thought of narrating a fight between them, but this isn't a battle. Literally, Huggy could tear Freddy's head off with one blow. The first point goes to the Poppy Playtime universe. The next fight would be Golden Freddy versus Kissy Missy, the 2 recallers who, in the game's story, turned out to be more important than the originals. But if you want to see this fight, this video needs to reach 5,000 likes. Meanwhile, the next video will be part 6 of Fall Server Fight Development. But without further ado,
¡Hasta la próxima!